you know, and that will be delivered by none other than Professor Radham Narasimha. And I dare not try to introduce him because, as Kalidasa puts it, Kva Surya Prabhavo Vamshaha, Kvacha Alpa Vishaya Matihi, Titirshuhu Dustaram Mohat, Udupe Nasmi Sagaram. Where is that great solar dynasty and where is my limited intellect? If I try to say something about that, it's like crossing a mighty ocean with a small raft. This is the humility of Kalidasa, but that perfectly holds good regarding me today in introducing Professor Radham Narasimha. He is like an ocean. Professor Narasimha has his BE from Mysore University, 1953, ME from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, 1955. He worked with Satish Dhawan during his time at IISc Bangalore. He then worked with Hans Lippmann at the California Institute of Technology, Caltech, United States, to obtain his PhD degree in 1961. He is an Indian aerospace scientist and fluid dynamic expert. He was professor of aerospace engineering at Indian Institute of Science, director of NAL, National Aerospace Laboratories, and the chairman of Engineering Mechanics Unit at Jawaharlal Nehru Center for Advanced Scientific Research, Bangalore. He is now an honorary professor at JNCA SR and currently holds Pratt and Whitney Chair in Science and Engineering at the University of Hyderabad. Professor Narasimha has been awarded Padma Vibhushan, India's second highest civilian award in 2013. Let us give him a big hand for this. He is the author of more than 200 research papers and 15 books. He has warned me not to study the entire CV. Therefore, I am going to stop at this, and I don't want to stand before him and you. And with these few words, I request Professor Narasimha to take over and conduct this evening's deliberations. Professor Narasimha.
I'm honored by the invitation that Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan and ISKCON have given to me to come and speak to this audience about the Upanishads and the Yoga Vasishtha. I was here yesterday and I've seen the program for today, and I see that many distinguished scholars from all over the country have spoken to you at great length about many different aspects of the Upanishads. Now, I must right away admit to you that I am not a scholar of the Upanishads. As you heard from that brief introduction, I am basically a scientist, a working scientist. And what I am therefore going to talk about will, I think, be very different in character from what you have heard. I cannot, for example, match the previous speaker's scholarship with the Vedas and the Upanishads and our other holy and sacred scriptures. However, I have been looking at these as a hobby on the side for quite some time. And one thing that has that I particularly got interested in, even as a scientist, quite some time ago, maybe 20, 30 years ago, was in the history of Indian science, Indic science, if you want to call it that way. If you look at science today in the world, the names that you hear, the principles that you use, the equations that you solve, all of these come from, almost without exception, come from the science that was generated in Europe over the last 400 years, 300, 400 years. So you begin to wonder whether all of this science has been only here for these few hundred years and has come from one continent. Now it has spread. You hear the names of the same heroes, the same laws, no matter where you study science in the world. So that interest led to looking at what our own ancient mathematicians, scientists, astronomers in particular, and philosophers have thought about the world, the universe, and where these are similar and where these are different. And I came to the conclusion that there was something which was very different in the way that Indian scholars, scientists, philosophers thought about the universe compared to the way that the West thought about it. And one thing led to another, and I've therefore come here to share with you some thoughts on what I see as some of the major characteristics of the Upanishads. I'll be brief about it because you will have heard a great deal about it during today and yesterday. And then I want to tell you about a work which is, in my view, very remarkable, a work called the Yoga Vasishtha, which I've spent some time studying, maybe over the last decade or more. So before I start, I must once again thank the organizer of this meeting, Mr. Suresh, the chairman, Mr. Ramanuja, and the people at ISKCON for giving me this opportunity to share some of these thoughts with you. So, may I have the next slide, please? I must say that I, especially on Yoga Vasishtha, I have a large number of slides. And I therefore will actually, they're there because if somebody asks me a question, I can have something which supports that point of view. But also it has something to do with the nature of the Yoga Vasishtha. But otherwise, I'd like to take you through some slides. First a few on the Upanishads. And then a few where there seems to be something common between the Yoga Vasishtha and the Upanishads, and where they start to strike different paths. My interest in these things I owe to two great men whom I call Sanskritic liberals. They were interested in Sanskrit. They were scientifically modern, culturally conservative, but socially very liberal. I call them Sanskritic liberals. One was Mr. D.V. Gundappa, from whom I had the fortune to take my first lessons in the Upanishads long ago. I'm talking about 50 years ago now, more than 50 years ago, close to 60 years ago. And then my father, who was also interested in the Upanishads and the other great Sanskrit works, and spent a fair bit of his time, he was a physicist, looking at these in his later years. Any error I make in interpreting these texts are entirely due to me, of course. Well, first impressions. As a working scientist, as I said, if I look at the Upanishads, the first things that strike me, and I'm not going into great detail about the content of the Upanishads, are those which are listed there. Well, there are questions and answers. We all complain now that our students don't ask questions, and they all mug up the answers in these books. But that's not at all the Indian tradition. Not only there were questions and answers, but there were sometimes very inconvenient questions. For example, yesterday, Professor Ram Subramaniam gave a wonderful lecture on why the Upanishads and what they are essentially intended to do. And he already told you the story of Nachiketa, who is dissatisfied with his father for the kind of gifts that he is giving to scholars. Now, it starts that way. It's a very ordinary incident. It's the sort of thing that might happen. In the first place, we see that as son, he didn't feel shy about telling his father why he was doing it. But very soon they're looking at the deepest problems in our understanding of the universe. The second thing that struck me was that abstract and concrete mix easily in the Upanishads. Take, for example, the story of Aruni, Udalaka Aruni. And he calls this young man who has asked this question, and he says, you get a seed. You get a fruit from this huge tree. Then he says, you crush it. He crushes it a few times until it's absolutely powder. And each stage he keeps asking him, what do you see? And he says, I see the seed, I cut it into two halves, and eventually it's powder, so that it doesn't see it. I don't see anything. So he tells him, but you see, each little bit of it, the tiniest speck there, contains the whole tree. The fruit, the leaves, the branches, everything. And then once again, it leads to a deep philosophical investigation. Gurus and Sishyas. Well, the Upanishads have wonderful sayings about Gurus and Sishyas and their relations. And one that particularly appealed to me was where they declare, Sahaviryam Karavavahai. They are on an adventure. They are saying it's a joint adventure between the teachers and their students. And they are saying, we shall undertake this adventure. Doubts and certainties. That in some ways seems to me the most striking thing about Indian scriptures. The Vedas and the Upanishads too do not mind telling you that they have doubts. There are famous instances, I come to them in a minute, where the Vedas say that they don't know. And maybe even he, or whoever the Supreme Spirit is, maybe even they don't know. So they were honest enough to admit ignorance. Stories and morals, I already mentioned some of them. Experience and logic. Now this is one major difference, I think, in the way that Indic saints and scholars have for a long time approached knowledge, compared, let's say, to what has happened in Europe. Now at first, this may seem funny to say that, but I'll once again come back to you about it, because, well, you have to define what you mean by logic. There's not one logic in this world, there are many logics in this world, and different civilizations have pursued different ways of introducing reasoning into any investigation they make. Philosophy and craftsmanship. Well, if we think of philosophy as something separate from our ordinary occupations, preoccupations, but if you read the Veda once again, this world was created by, well, what kind of carpenter, what kind of architect, what kind of builder, what kind of sculptor? That's the question that they ask. And the stories, I've already mentioned them. The stories themselves, very interesting in relating some common observation to some very deep philosophical point. Can you go to the next one? The next one. I want to spend 1 minute on logic, because that I think is central to understanding not only Indian philosophy but also Indian science, classical Indian science. The logic that we all learn in school and university, implicitly, not explicitly, but implicitly, goes back to Europe, Aristotle. And among the many things that Aristotle did was this fundamental principle, which at first seems absolutely obvious. Something and its contrary can't be true at the same time. So you have two options. Either this is true or this is true. And that's been made into a great mathematical technique over thousands of years. For example, if you studied geometry in Euclid, there was something which struck me even when I was a young boy. You have to prove a theorem, and in order to prove the theorem, you first say, let's assume the theorem is wrong. And then you say that if you say the theorem is wrong, it contradicts Aristotle, something else which you have proved before. Well, if the theorem can't be wrong, the theorem must be right. Well, that kind of logic was never actually fundamentally accepted in India at all. To people who do not know much more about it, They will always, that's why you will find Western scholars, at least in an earlier age, used to say they don't understand Indian logic. Indian logic is really, Indians do not have logic. Even as recently as a few decades ago, my American friends would ask me about science in India. Is there reasoning in your science? So it amazed me that such a question would actually be asked. But what has often characterized Indian logic is a reluctance to accept that it is either this or that. We've had many different kinds of multiple valued logic. The Vedas and the Upanishads are full of statements which do not say either this or that. Charaka, Nilakantha, all of these have talked about it, the astronomers, the medical scientists. In the Vedas, the Buddhists, the Jains, they just actually seem to have found that multiple valued logic is more natural to describe the universe. Let me just give you a few examples. Can I have the next slide, please? You see, it starts from the Rig Veda. That famous Nasadiya Sukta starts from saying, Nasadasi, Nasadasi. It was not Sat, it was not Asat. Neither Sat nor Sat was there. Well, Aristotle wouldn't be able to understand that at all. If you take another thing, Nam Mrityurasi, Amrutam, Namrutyurasi, Amrutam Natarhi. It was not that. It was not immortality. There's Shankara's famous verse, Sannapya Sannapya Ubhayatmikana. It's not Sat, it's not Asat, it's not both even. And if you ask the Buddhists, they will say it's not A and B, maybe A and B. It may be A plus B. It may be both A and B. It may be neither A nor B. You have to give 4 options. Now, how is it that two ancient cultures think in these different ways? It goes back to language. Now, the interesting thing about Indic thinking is that while, especially in Sanskrit, there's so much effort, so much intellectual effort of extraordinary ability has gone into looking at the nature of languages. But at the same time, there's an extremely keen appreciation of the limitations of language. Indic philosophers found it natural to assume that if you ask a simple question, maybe there is something wrong in the language you're using to describe that phenomenon. So multiple values came very naturally to them. So let's go to the next slide. So these are doubts. You see, for example, this famous Vedic doubt, the last one of all this, the overseer of all this is the highest heaven. He alone knows, or perhaps he does not. You talk about this great spirit, Asya Adhyaksha, that Adhyaksha of this universe. Maybe he even doesn't know. We are willing to live with that thing. Then, you look at, once again, that famous Nasadiya Sukta. The gods actually come later than creation. Whereas, everywhere else in the world, the God is the creator and he created the universe. It's almost as if India is saying, man came there and we created God. And we created, and the creation really, therefore, was there even before. I'm not saying, must take either this view or that view. I'm trying to tell you the kind of views, the kind of thinking that has characterized Indian approach to understanding the world and the universe around us. Let me go to give you another example which struck me very much. Next slide, please. There is this beautiful question answer session in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Everybody here will probably know about it. How many gods are there? And there is Vidagdha Shakalya. Vidagdha means clever. Who asked Yajnavalkya this question? How many gods are there? And Yajnavalkya first says 3003. Then he says 303. Shakarya, of course, thought very highly of himself. And he says, he was not satisfied with this answer. So he says, no, but how many are there actually? Then Yajnavalkya comes back and says 33. Then he says 3. Then he says 2. Then he says 1.5. Can you believe that? He says 1.5, and then finally he says 1. Next slide. And at that stage, Shakalya goes back and said, what's all that you said about 3003 and 303? And he gives you. And he relates it to, the number of gods mentioned in the Nimittu. Vishwadevas. 1.5, he considers wind as 1.5 because it keeps growing. It blows, but it keeps growing. And finally, Brahman. Well, what that answer says, it doesn't say so in so many words. It once again says, it depends. It depends on what you mean by your question. Next slide. What do the Upanishads say? Well, the Upanishads also say many different things, and you have heard a great deal about it, I'm sure, during the last 2 days. And there are many scholars here who know a great deal more about it than I do. But I like this summary by Radhakrishnan. Both absolute and personal God are real. Only the former is a logical priya. It doesn't say no personal gods quite, but it says logically the fundamental thing is the absolute thing. If you ask the Sankhya philosophers, also ancient, they will say there's not enough pramana for Ishvara, not enough evidence, so they don't take a view. There are the Nirishvara Sankhyas who don't take a view. If you ask Buddha, he actually wanted to remain silent. He said, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. He refused to answer that question. Once again, you see the wide variety of replies that these questions have got. Now, reality is another thing that every school of philosophy in India has been worried about. Next slide. Attempts to describe reality, describe universe, end up with the kind of paradoxes or apparent contradictions in an Aristotelian sense. And what Indian philosophers conclude from that is that these words, our words, are not enough to describe the nature of reality. Yato vacha nivartante. You send out your words, but they recoil from that subject. And there are other things. What words cannot give rise to, but can give rise to words. That is Brahma, you say. So there is this very keen appreciation of the limitations of words and reality. So how could I have the next slide, please? And there are very interesting analogies given about reality and about how we can easily be mistaken. I have just one or two here. In the Mundaka Upanishad, the example goes down. You see, the examples are very earthy in the Upanishads. You have a blazing fire and sparks come out from there. That blazing fire is fundamental, but many different manifestations, many different things come out of it, like these sparks. There's another interpretation. There's a little spark, and you turn it around like these crackers which you do during Deepavali. If you do it fast enough, you see a ring. But that's an illusion. There's no ring. It's the spark going around. So from these very earthy, homely examples, they come to deep conclusions about the nature of reality. Could I go to the next one? Let's skip this. Next one. So that's all I want to say about the Upanishads. That's the background against which I want to tell you about the kind of view that the Yoga Vasishtha takes. Now, the Yoga Vasishtha is not as widely read as the Upanishads. And in fact, I think it has a small following. But this small following goes around the world. There is a relatively small club of people who are enchanted and fascinated by the Yoga Vasishtha, and I am one of them. Now, this was, we do not know who wrote it. Of course, we don't know that in most cases, but at least in the Vedas and the Upanishads, there is some indication of some rishi, some sage, who is the origin of the suktas. In the Yoga Vasishtha, there is no indication at all. In fact, I think the author is brilliantly successful in hiding his identity completely. So, scholars therefore worry about this. They try to do a piece of detective's work, try to find out when it might have been written, who it might have been. And once again, many different dates. Maybe around the 7th century is a good guess. Maybe just before Shankara, around the time of Shankara, or just before, because he does refer to things which are not very ancient. So somewhere around that time, somebody wrote this extraordinary work. It is said that there is another work called Mokshopaya, from which the Yoga Vasishtha derives. We still don't have the Mokshopaya in full, but I think a German scholar is working on it. Maybe this year, next year, we will have one available. Now, the thing about Yoga Vasishtha is that, according to the author himself, it is a kavya. It's not like the Upanishads. It's not a philosophical work. It is actually a big poem. It is actually an epic poem. It purports to be a report on a conversation, on a samvada between Rama and Vasishtha. And there's a story behind it. The story is that young Rama, 16 years old, has to go somewhere on a pilgrimage. And as he goes, he sees all this misery around him. He is depressed, and he comes back, and he doesn't want to do anything. He doesn't want to eat, he doesn't want to play. He sits there with his head in his hands, does nothing, doesn't answer questions, and so on. So, the book is actually about that. It has philosophy, but its objective is somewhat different from that of classical philosophical work. But in order to tell you where a contact begins between the Upanishads and the Yoga Vasishtha, I want to quote you some verses from the Yoga Vasishtha on reality, because we have just discussed that in terms of the Upanishads. Well, this is something which might be taken out of the Upanishads. He also says, this isn't real, this is not unreal, sat, asat, neither asat nor asat. It is only brilliant illusion. What we see is illusion. Well, that's a characteristic Advaitic view, and that is the line which he seems to be following. Next slide, please. So now in this dialogue, there is Vasishtha telling Rama about what is truly real, his definition of the real. What is there in the beginning and the end, and always, that is what is real. Whatever is real and the beginning and the end, that is real even now. So he has something to say there about a specific definition. Next slide, please. And he introduces the well-known Sarpa-Rajju conundrum that will be familiar to all of you here, made great use of by Advaitic philosopher Shankara in particular. Next slide. So once again, the real, the unreal all arise solely from imagination, which itself is both real and unreal. So what is the truth? Well, you see that these are very resonant with Upanishadic thinking. Could I have the next slide, please? It goes on like this. I'll skip these. Go ahead. Here is, however, one which is also an analogy, but I put this in because it's very characteristic of the style of the Yoga Vasishtha. Every now and then, it really becomes a poem. It becomes poetry. As the author himself admits, he's writing a kavya, so every now and then, he's wonderfully poetic. So this is what he says. This is dreamlike delusion. Mithya rachita chakrika, this maya, this imaginary machine. It's like a lovely whirlpool. Salilavarta sundari. It's a beautiful little vortex, that's what he says, water. As a lovely whirlpool on the kingdom of the mind. That is what your impression of reality is. Next slide, please. And another very striking analogy like the previous one. All that we see in front of us is a dance in the three-word puppet show. Trijagat Putrika Nritya. As all flow swirls, however, in Brahma water, and gusts and gales in Brahma wind. That is where he is leading. It is a phenomenon. It's something which comes out of it. It's not the basic thing itself. It is something which we see, transient, changing, maybe dynamic, but something else. There's something else which is fundamental, in this case, water, for example, and these pictures that we see. That comes very close to the idea that physicists today have of emerging phenomena. You have a system out of which, by mechanisms which we don't always completely understand, some ordered structure seems to emerge. But what is his objective? His objective, what he wants to achieve by his work, is this. This is very clearly stated, very early. It's the seventh, as you can see, it is the seventh shloka in the Yoga Vasishtha. The shloka of Yoga Vasishtha is a big work. 27,000 odd shlokas. It's supposed to be an episode in the Ramayana, but it's bigger than the Ramayana itself. It's longer than the Ramayana. So it's really an epic poem. So right here at the beginning, on page 1, this is the statement that Yoga Vasishtha makes. Just as for a bird, both wings are necessary. A bird can't fly on one wing. Both wings are necessary. Similarly, for a man to perfect himself, two things are both necessary. And the two things are knowing and doing. See, jnana and karma, you need both of them. Those are the words that the author of the Yoga Vasishtha uses. I'll every now and then say Vasishtha, although it's you know that it's somebody else who wrote that book later on. That is the key difference between the Upanishads and the Yoga Vasishtha. It's not that there is nothing about action in the Upanishads. There is. And in fact, even yesterday, there was some discussion about that. But in the Yoga Vasishtha, it's symmetrical. Knowing and doing are two things, two different things. It seems to be suggesting. But they have the same weight. The symmetrical, they have the same weight. If you just know and don't do, it's not satisfying. If you just don't do and don't know, it's not satisfying. And the point that he's trying to make to Rama is that you have to do both. You can't, you're a prince, you're going to run a kingdom sometime, and you can't do it without knowing both sides of it. You must understand and then you must do. Then, freedom, liberation, whatever you want to call it, that is also a major thing that the Yoga Vasishtha discusses. And what is necessary for freedom? Freedom is protected by 4 mighty guards, the guardians outside there. And those 4 guards are, one is discipline. He's already getting to action. It's how you behave, it's how you govern your time, how you do what you're supposed to do. Analysis. Well, the Sanskrit word for analysis that I have translated vichara as analysis. Well, vichara is a word which is very familiar to all of us. Vichara plays a great role in whatever Vasishtha says you have to learn to use. Vichara is central to his philosophy of action and even of knowledge. I translate that as analysis, but the word vichara in Sanskrit has many different connotations, more connotations than the word analysis has in English. So I sometimes use slightly different words if I think that but other word conveys the sense more easily or more accurately in English. Good cheer. Just sorry, 1 second. Don't go. Good cheer is very important. Santosha. You have to be cheerful. You have to be happy. And finally, wise company. So these, he says, are the 4 things that you should cultivate if you want to know and to do. Next. Well, this is about, now I go back to the background. I already mentioned to you about Rama and his depression. No work absorbs him, and he's silent, he doesn't utter a word. Next. So what happens in the Yoga Vasishtha is that, Vishwamitra appears once in Dasharatha's court, and he hears that Rama is depressed. And Dasharatha asks him, what should I do? You are a wise man, tell me what I should do about Rama's depression. And Vishwamitra says, well, all of this is the way that the Yoga Vasishtha is an expert at playing these on these themes. Vishwamitra tells Dasharatha, you please get Vasishtha. He is your Rajguru. You please get him to talk to Rama. All of us know the story about Vishwamitra and Vasishtha, and how Vishwamitra spent his whole life, so to speak, wanting to be recognized as a Brahmin by no other than Vasishtha. And of course that happens. So, but anyway, he says, you please get Vasishtha. And Vasishtha comes there. This is, however, the Upanishads, as we were told yesterday, as is well known, the Upanishads are sort of secret teachings. Your Shishya sits there next to you, and is a teaching which the Guru shares with a small number of his pupils. The ones who have won the authority are qualified to get that teaching. But this conversation between Rama and Vasishtha is public. It goes on for 18 days, and the public are there. So it's a kind of public discussion between Rama and Vasishtha. But every now and then, Rama interrupts him and asks him a question. Here once again, this is very similar to the Upanishads. Well, Rama is a prince, he is dejected. He of course has respect for Vasishtha, but he does not mind asking very inconvenient questions. He does not mind teasing Vasishtha. Well, here are a few examples. So, Vasishtha says something, and Rama tells him, even the kids tell us that the universe is only in the mind. And he already knew something about philosophy. So where is the need to hold forth for you with all that special instruction on that subject? He says, let's get on with something else. That's what he says. Bala api vadanti. So, next slide. So Vasishtha, of course, tells him. Vasishtha every now and then tells him, you are a smart man. You ask me very interesting questions. And between the two of us, we can sort this all out. I was once again reminded of Sahaviryam Karavavahe. So he's telling you and I together can actually sort this problem out. But as far as we're talking about freedom, liberation, here is his liberal side. Vasishtha, incidentally, the Vasishtha of this book is a very liberal man. Very liberal man in the sense in which we use the word liberal today, all over the world. Gender, race, religion don't matter to him at all. And you can see what he's saying here. Beasts, barbarians. And incidentally, the Yoga Vasishtha has some very interesting women characters. There are 50 odd stories. I won't talk to you about the stories at all. They're fascinating stories. And in many of them, the strongest characters are women. There's a famous story about Queen Chudala. I'm afraid I don't have time to tell you about that story, but maybe some of you know about it. It is Chudala who is ahead of her husband. She gets liberated before the husband does. See, so he has no problem with all these biases which our society and the rest of the world has for a long time suffered from. Next. Then, here is where some philosophical friction, you may say, begins to develop. Rama once makes a statement saying, it's all the working of the mind and so on. But Vasishtha tells him, if you think that this universe is solely the working of the mind, then you haven't understood it at all. And in particular, it doesn't tell you how to go ahead and combine knowledge and action, or how the cycle of life, samsara chakra, can actually be overcome. Next slide. And so on. You see, he says you are contradicting yourself. He finds flaws in his logic. What I am trying to tell you is not so much that what the position on that issue is. It is the nature of the conversation which goes on between the two. Next slide. So this is Vasishtha coming back to him. He admits, he says, you, Rama, are excellent with your questions, with all the questions you ask. And I should have the answers. He says, no, I know the answers for your questions. So we shall, between us, make a fine pair indeed. We will together sort out these problems. Next, please. Now, actually, his view of his own work is also very interesting. He is at one and the same time modest about it, but also seems to know its value. He does not hesitate to claim that there is no such work in the world. See, this is the best, those that take the Shastric view. For it pleases and instructs, and it charms as well. He is correct. I'm sure that the author put it in because that was his objective, but that's entirely correct. It's actually a charming book in many ways. But he says there is nothing original here. I'm not telling you anything new. What I'm trying to tell you is in fact Shastra. I think he exaggerates that. I think that many of those views might have been there, but the way it's presented by him is very different. Can we go on to the next one, please? Let's go on to the next one. Well, there is a lot about consciousness. Now, consciousness is central in the Upanishad. So I just want to show you one or two slides about what the Yoga Vasishtha says about consciousness. Well, first introduces the space of consciousness. Next one. The universe rests pervasively in the space of consciousness. Once again, you see, once again, these analogies, these examples keep coming up. An animal example. The fluid of the egg. You take a little bit of the fluid of the egg, all those colors are there. So he says that's the kind of relation. Yeah. Next slide, please. Well, okay, I think I should actually skip these. Let's go ahead. Let's go ahead. Yeah. How about duality? Well, non-dual. Well, there is, of course, a great deal in the Upanishads that has led to Advaitic philosophy. Although there are many schools, some schools interpret them differently. There are Advaitic, there are Advaitic, and there is the Visishtadvaitic interpretations of the same text. But this is what Vasishtha's advice to Rama is. He says, the real is not dual. Soul will that thought. The real is not dual. Embrace the thought that being is not dual, but reject the thought that action is not dual. When it comes to action, it has to be dual. So his advice to him is, the last line there, be both, full of both dual and non-dual. Don't make some doctor there think about being Advaitic, and therefore then you will actually be hurt in your action. Now you can say that this was advice given to a prince. It was an advice given to a prince, but it also exhibits the philosophy of the Yoga Vasishtha. Dvaita Advaita is not central to its philosophy. Next slide. About fate. Well, the common view of most of the world is that Indians are fatalistic. They will accept anything that happens, and they're easy to adjust themselves to whatever happens. But the Yoga Vasishtha makes extraordinarily firm statements about fate. In fact, I must tell you that this is the first thing that attracted me to it. I saw a quotation from the Yoga Vasishtha long ago, which had this verse. And that verse, Mudhai Prakalpita. Faith has been invented by fools. And they get obsessed with it, and they are ruined. But the wise man, by manly effort, attains the most exalted height. Manly effort, Purusharthena. That's the other part that is central to the Yoga Vasishtha. Well, I said central already on two concepts. Vichara and Paurusha. It emphasizes everywhere, Vichara and Paurusha become the central themes of the book. So here is how Paurusha comes into the picture. Your effort. By your effort, you can conquer what people think is faith. Next slide. It goes on like that. Cast afar the meaning of faith to which its worshippers impute their acts. They blame fate. But the brave attain perfection entirely by their own manly effort. Once again, Svapaurushena, by their own manly effort. Next slide. Then there is the law. Well, there is karma. Are there other laws in the universe? Laws which have to be obeyed. So that defines what he means by the law. The rules that lay down this is so for everything from a blade of grass. But it's not just for human beings. It is even for the gods. To Brahmic energy, to the great Rudra. Rules are laid down for them as well. Those rules have been called the law. That's his definition of the law. The law is something which transcends these differences. Next. So, when Chirantika goes and asks that somebody who is dead, should come back. So Devi says, sorry, to abolish death has not been possible. It is the law. Nobody can abolish death, ever since creation. For the law is very strict. So, Varam Varaya Suvrate. Pious lady, please ask me for something else. I can't do anything about it. Go ahead. Well, I put this in because it's a particular view of creation, of its richness, once again expressed in very poetical terms. The riches of creation are like the sparks from a fire. Well, that goes back to the Upanishads actually. It's similar to what the Mundaka Upanishad says. They arrive, depart, they ascend or fall. In that pure and unified space that's without beginning or middle. But the last two lines are the interesting ones. I don't think the cause is what is called God. Well, does that go against Upanishadic thinking? Or is it consonant with it? Well, we saw that verse from the Rig Veda, where they said, even the man, was there a creator? Well, the creator came after the creation. Okay. And when he was creating it, he needed the help of 7 rishis. So from one point of view, you can't say that this does not agree with the Vedic view. But it's put, as always in the Yoga Vasishtha, much more forcefully. The statements are made to drive home a point in very strong language. Go ahead. Well, let's skip these. Let's keep all these things which are called physics. Go ahead. Well, that's about life and death. So can you go ahead? Now we come to analysis. What is this analysis? And Vasishtha tells him about what analysis and how he should go about it. First, everybody must conduct an inquiry into his own virtues and faults. You must ask yourself very honestly what your weaknesses are. Next. Well, and then this is in celebration of reason, vichara. And he says, whatever it is, wealth, dominion, pleasure, or liberation, whatever it is that you're looking for, they are the fruits of that magical tree. You see, vichara kalpa vrikshasya. Vichara is a kalpa vriksha. Okay. Fruits of that tree are known as reason, and that's very important. Next slide, please. So, the king, anybody, he has to go only by analysis. There is no other way. Go ahead. Can you go ahead? Next slide. And he's telling him, don't be sentimental. See, this is a very, very realistic and practical advice to Rama. If you know somebody who drinks water from a well because it's been there from his grandfather's time, but there is Ganga Jala right in front of him, flowing by, the river is flowing by, but he doesn't take Ganga Jala. He goes back to his grandfather's well. He calls him a sentimental fool. Ati Ragina. Next slide. So somebody who cannot reason has lost his soul. Next slide. So analysis is only powerful cure for the disease of worldliness. So analysis is necessary even for these more altruistic objectives. Next slide, please. Then comes self-effort. It's the other part of it. The other wing, the two wings. See, one is analysis, and the other one is self-effort. So, if you can do something, if you achieve something, then the fruit you are looking for has been obtained, has been gained. It gives you a cool gladness in the heart. Sitala Ahladana. And it arises like the wood. Once again, the poetry is beautiful. Then you gain it by self-effort. If you gain it because somebody else gave it to you, that's a different thing. If you do it by yourself, then you feel very happy about it. Next slide, please. But the scriptures are important. What you do must still be in accord with scriptures in some sense. Because if you are not, then that leads to utter ruin. Next. Next. Okay. So, he says, every object in this is a strong statement once again. Every object in this world of ours can be attained by everybody if they are capable of that effort and can plan that effort. Samyak prayukta. It has to be samyak prayukta. Thoughtfully planned, well planned. Next slide, please. Next slide. Then, at some stage, Rama once again comes back with one of his teasing questions. You talk about the past, you talk about the future, but what about the present? I'm interested in the present, he says. And you have the long chain of creation you talked about. But what about the present? What must one do in actual life? Next slide, please. So, past and present. The way that Vasishtha looks at past and present is once again in terms of very powerful similes. For him, past each human being, there's a fight going on inside each human being between the past and the present. No, you have inherited something from the past, but you have to do something in the present. And he says they're like two bulls locked in combat, very closely matched. You can't say who wins. It's not a foregone conclusion at all. And between them, the weaker one succumbs. So what he's saying is, the past will win, as some fatalists might believe. But that's only because you are weak. Your effort is weak. If your effort is strong, the past can be defeated. I think he says that very clearly. Next one. The follies of the past can, without doubt, be overcome. In other words, he does not believe in fate. And he says, whatever it might have been due to your past deeds, what you do today and tomorrow can overcome them. Next. Yeah, well, you've already seen this. Next. 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 Yeah, once again, I just want once again to make this a very striking point he makes. He says, although the fruit of the work that a man does is very visible, it is, well, we say that, Kannadalli ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ, Karamalakanta. It's like that Nalika is sitting on your palm, but you don't see it. People don't see it. The fool rejects the evidence of his eyes and sinks into infatuation with the divine. He has nothing against the divine, but he doesn't want somebody to sink into infatuation with the divine. Next. Who is a wise man? The wise man, in Vasishtha's definition, is involved with the world. He is actually a vyavahari. He is a man who is deeply interested and involved in the world's affairs. He does not say these are mundane. He actually is directly engaged with the world's affairs. And a wise man is one who is immersed in all the affairs and interests of this world, but remains cool. So he lives free. This he lives free is a translation for being a Jivan Mukta. So this concept of Jivan Mukta, if you want to be a Jivan Mukta, this is what you should do. Next. Yeah. The mind. Your mind is very important. You must care about it. Next. However, the mind is the grand hub around which whirls maddeningly a magical being. That is this world we see. The world we see is very largely the reaction of your mind to what you see. And everything in that world is whirling around you. It's maddening. Maya chakrasya. See, it's a Maya chakra. Brahmato Maya chakra. Next sentence. Well, next sentence. Next verse. Yeah, just go to the previous one. Yeah, about the body and the mind. Now, actually, it's your body which does all this. It wakes, it cries, it kills, and it eats. It travels and dances and blames. That's what we are doing all our life. But all this is what the mind and body does, not the body itself. So don't blame the body. It's your mind which is responsible for all of it. Next. Yeah. Go ahead. So an intelligent man achieves his peace through this pure and supreme principle. And ever keeps savoring it within his soul. Even as outwardly he is busy with the world. He's always busy. And you see, Vyavaharannapi. It's not against Vyavahara at all. It's part of being a wise man. Next slide. Once again, a man who does that, he's said to be a great soul. Well, that's a Mahatma. In fact, the word great soul, Mahatma appears here, the same word, which all of us apply to Mahatma Gandhi in this country, because he was involved in the affairs of the country, very directly. I don't know whether the people who gave him the title Mahatma knew that that was the sense in which the Yoga Vasishtha had used that word. He is the great Lord. He is a great soul. That's the way that Indians reacted to Mahatma Gandhi in any case. Next. Now, here is where his values are shown to be very strong. For the awake and analyzing soul that knows its own true nature well, Swabhavas Yoditatmanaha. Even Brahma, Vishnu, Indra, Shankara, they become mere objects of sympathy. In other words, your vichara, if you are strong in your vichara and in your action, you are not overawed by all these other names that you have heard about. Why? Because he is himself. He is himself a great man. Well, okay. I think that there are many more. I've probably said enough to tell you what the ideas of the Yoga Vasishtha are. Let's just keep going. If there is something I want to stop by, I tell you. Just go back to one. In the company of the wise, that keeps coming back again and again. So I have one verse here. And if you have wise men around you, it says, the empty becomes full, death turns into triumph, and crisis brightens to fortune. The importance of wise men in whatever you do. Okay, let's go ahead. Maybe we should go to more or less the last one. Can we go ahead? Yeah. Serenity. Serenity is another great virtue, and it once again defines who a serene man is, how he achieves his serenity. It says there, for example, everything that he does, all human acts, are touched by a pure and shining intellect, and are the same within as outwardly they see. There's no, in other words, it's very, very honest, great integrity. There they say is a man serene. Okay, please go ahead. Let's skip these. Yeah. I think maybe I should now go towards the very end. I see that my time is up. You go to the last one. There's something about life and death and God. Go back to poetry and go back one before. I want to end with these two. In spite of all of this, see, the body is not treated with contempt in the Yoga system. The body is also important. He tells Rama again and again, you must do, you must enjoy, you must renounce. That's to say, not against enjoyment, but you must renounce. You should not consider anything your property, your possession. And this is the comment he has on the body. It's a great city. The body is a great city. Well, it's a very complex mechanism. It should be a source of joy and not misery. Okay, there are Sanskrit verses which tell you how your body is just a mass of muscle and sinew, etc., etc. But that's not the view he takes. To a wise man, it's like a garden. And that I thought was an extraordinary simile, that is like a garden. Why? It gives him pleasure and it sets him free at one and the same time. Okay. And he says that's the way that you should treat your body. Next, I want to conclude with this last bit of poetry. Actually, you see, the book is scattered with lovely little slokas. They describe all kinds of things. There are 50 stories, I told you, more than 50 stories. There are beautiful descriptions of young married love. There are beautiful descriptions of nature. There are beautiful descriptions of the assembly of people who gather during these discussions. And here is one of them. This is as the discussion for the day is over. Okay, what do you see at the end of the day? As the sun sets, the western hill is robed in purple clouds decorated with little frills. Kimchit kinchit kunkuma chayaya, tinged with the slightest red by the rays of the sun. All of us have seen these things, right? You've seen those clouds. But still, his description is absolutely beautiful. And on sky and hill is cast a splendid necklace of stars. Tara hara Sriyuta comes on it. There is a tara, there is a necklace of stars. So, that's where I want to end. Let me just make a very brief summarizing statement. It seems to me that you look at the Yoga Vasishtha, there's a part of it which is very similar to what the Upanishads say. Consciousness, reality, it shares the fundamental conceptual expressions that you find in the Vedas and the Upanishads. There is probably nothing inconsistent with it, but it takes some of these statements to a conclusion in terms of action. Its objective is to ask people to act, but act in ways that are consistent with the deep roots of Upanishadic philosophy, but the deep root. But all the other things that grow, that you have to do, it won't come automatically. That's not enough. And in order to have, either if you want to be liberated, or if you want to save the world, you have to combine both knowledge and action. Very roughly speaking. Well, here the Upanishads would say something about knowledge. And in many cases, that's what I would also say. But there is action. And there, vichara and paurusha are very important. That's what it should be. One way to look at it is that it was the advice that a prince needed. I think that's a very limited way of looking at it. It's an advice that he gives to all those people who are Vyavaharis in this world. They are the very large number, they are the majority. He is once again going back to that old Upanishadic trait, where they start with something very mundane and come to some deep conclusion. Now he is going to reverse way. There are all these deep conclusions. They imply this for your, what you may think of as mundane action, but they are half of your being a free man. The other half being vichara, thinking, analysis. Thank you very much.
On behalf of Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan and ISKCON, we deem it a great honor that an internationally well-known and a Padma Vibhushan awardee, Professor Narasimha, could spare some time with us in sharing his valuable thoughts, wherein he tried to correlate the Upanishadic thoughts with that of Yoga Vasishta. Of course, only he can do it because some time back he has written a book to this effect. So, in this particular background, we request Sri H.N. Suresh, Director, Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, to kindly come on to the dais and offer our grateful, respectful thanks to the learned speaker of this evening, Professor Narasimha, for his scintillating lecture on Upanishads and Yoga Vasishta, where he culled out some specific instances and correlated that with the thought of Yoga Vasishta in an admirable way. This is just a humble token of gratitude on behalf of Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan and ISKCON. We are extending it to Professor Narasimha. And now the Dwasuparna, which has been engraved, has been handed over to Professor Narasimha. Upanishad calendar, which was released yesterday, is also being handed over to Professor Narasimha. Our grateful thanks to him.